They say war ends when the guns go silent, but sometimes the most dangerous battles begin after the last missile lands. In the aftermath of the Iran-Israel conflict, something subtle but deeply unsettling started spreading across the West. It wasn't just political tension or diplomatic backlash. It was fear. A fear not aimed at a country or a military, but at a religion, Islam. And the way the media helped shape that fear was anything but accidental. I noticed it right away. As the headlines rolled out, they weren't just reporting on the war. They were choosing sides. Language became loaded. Words like Islamic regime, radical jihad, or Muslim aggression were casually inserted into stories that were supposed to be objective. It didn't matter that the average Muslim living in London, Paris, or New York had nothing to do with geopolitics in the Middle East. Suddenly, Islam itself was the suspect, and the media had made the accusation. It's easy to miss how this happens unless you're paying close attention. A story about Iranian missile strikes gets followed by footage of angry men chanting in Arabic. A panel discussion on foreign policy shifts seamlessly into fears about homegrown extremism. And every time the word Islam is used, it's rarely about peace, prayer, or the billions who quietly live their faith. It's almost always paired with conflict, terror, or oppression. That's not journalism. That's narrative building. And it works. Public perception doesn't form in a vacuum. If you're constantly shown a religion through the lens of violence and hostility, eventually you start to associate one with the other. It's subtle, but devastating. I've spoken to people who genuinely believe Islam encourages violence. People who've never read Quran, never met a Muslim, and yet hold firm opinions, shaped entirely by what they've consumed online or watched on TV. What's worse is that many media outlets don't even need to lie to push this fear. They just need to choose what to show and what to leave out. Show the protests in Tehran, but not the interfaith peace rallies in Istanbul. Highlight the extremists, ignore the scholars. Feature stories of radicalization, but not conversion. This selective storytelling creates a skewed image, one that reinforces stereotypes and keeps fear alive. The irony is that while Western media claims to champion liberal values like tolerance, freedom, and truth, it's often complicit in spreading division. The very people calling for consistency are being taught day after day to be suspicious of Muslims, to question the hijab, to fear the beard. And after every major geopolitical event involving a Muslim majority country, this suspicion flares up like clockwork. After the Iran-Israel war, the pattern repeated itself. People didn't just talk about the war. They talked about Islamic aggression. Social media was flooded with anti-Muslim rhetoric. Politicians used the moment to push policies that targeted Muslim communities under the guise of national security. And through it all, the media kept feeding the fire, sometimes intentionally, sometimes through sheer laziness or ignorance. Either way, the result was the same. I've had Muslim friends tell me they were suddenly looked at differently at work, that their mosque got extra patrol cars outside. Not for protection, but for surveillance. I've seen people post things like, all Muslims should be watched, or you can't trust them. People who'd never dare say the same about Christians after a war involving a Western nation. It's a double standard, and it's dangerous. This isn't just about hurt feelings. It's about safety, about belonging, about what happens when an entire population gets painted with the same brush because of political conflicts happening thousands of miles away. When the media fails to separate the actions of a government from the beliefs of its people. Or worse, when it chooses not to, it contributes to a culture of fear that fuels hate, division, and violence. But here's what they won't show you. Islam is growing in the West, not because of fear or force, but because people are finding something meaningful in it. While the headlines scream terror, thousands are quietly converting, praying, learning, and finding peace. That doesn't fit the narrative, though. It's not dramatic enough. So it gets buried. And that's the real tragedy, because beyond the politics, beyond the propaganda, there's a deep, rich, and beautiful faith being misrepresented on the world stage. One that teaches mercy, charity, and patience. But the media rarely shows that side, because peace doesn't go viral. Fear does. So the next time you see a headline tying Islam to war or extremism, ask yourself, what's the full story? Who benefits from this framing? And most importantly, who gets hurt? Because until we challenge the way Islam is portrayed in the media, we'll keep seeing the saddening a conflict breaks out and Muslims everywhere are forced to explain, defend, and justify their faith in a world that's already made up its mind. And that's not just unfair. It's unjust. After the Iran-Israel war, something changed just on the battlefield, not just in diplomatic halls, but on the streets of London, New York, Paris, and Berlin. The tension wasn't confined to headlines or political commentary. It spilled into daily life. Suddenly, a hijab became a symbol. A beard became a threat. A mosque wasn't just a place of worship. It was a target. And all around me, I could feel it a rise in hate, a wave of anti-Muslim rhetoric, bold and unashamed. It didn't take long. Within days of the first strikes, the online world was filled with a storm of ugly comments. Signed them back, Muslim scum, they're all the same. Phrases I'd seen before, but never with such intensity. People were venting, yes, but not at governments, not at military strategies or foreign policy. They were directing it at ordinary Muslims, people who had nothing to do with the war. Mothers, students, shopkeepers, cab drivers, people like me. The media headlines lit the match, but social media poured gasoline. Echo chambers erupted with misinformation, wild claims that all Muslims were celebrating violence or that mosques were secretly plotting something sinister. It was absurd, but that didn't matter. The truth had no chance against fear wrapped in outrage. And when fear becomes normalized, hate quickly follows. In cities across the West, hate crimes began to rise. Vandalized mosques, women attacked for wearing hijabs, verbal abuse on buses and trains. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a deeper sickness. Islam wasn't just misunderstood anymore. It was being treated like an enemy, and people felt entitled to lash out. I remember reading a story about a young Muslim girl, just 15, who was shoved to the ground walking home from school. The attacker said something about getting revenge for Israel. What kind of twisted logic leads a grown adult to blame a child for a war she didn't cause and probably doesn't fully understand? That's the power of hate rhetoric. It doesn't need facts. It just needs a target. But what struck me most wasn't just the violence, it was how normal the hate was becoming. People didn't whisper their opinions anymore. They said them out loud, in public, with pride, talking about Muslims as if we were a problem to be solved, not people to be understood. I'd hear conversations in cafes, office spaces, even family gatherings where Islam was casually framed as backward, violent, or incompatible with Western values. I started noticing the small things too. Colder stares, longer pauses at airport security, nervous glances on public transport. Friends who'd once been curious about my faith now avoided the topic altogether, as if it was suddenly radioactive. And when I brought up how bad it was getting, some people shrugged it off. It's just politics. They said, it'll blow over. But it doesn't blow over when it's your everyday life. What people don't see is the mental toll it takes, the constant need to prove your innocence, to remind the world that you're not what they think you are, that you don't support terrorism, that you're not radical, that your faith is peaceful, even though you're rarely allowed to talk about that part. It's exhausting and it's unfair. And let's be honest, this isn't new. Anti-Muslim sentiment in the West didn't begin with Iran or Israel. It's been there for years, flaring up after every major attack, every conflict involving a Muslim-majority country. But this time felt more personal, more intense, because this time the anger wasn't just reactive. It was proactive. People weren't just afraid. They were hostile. The political climate didn't help. Some leaders used the conflict as an excuse to push harsh immigration policies, increase surveillance, or ban certain religious symbols. They framed it as national security. But to many of us, it felt like we were being punished for existing. It felt like an indirect way of saying, you don't belong here. But here's the truth: most people miss Muslims have been part of the West for generations. We're doctors, teachers, artists, business owners. We celebrate birthdays, go to football games, vote in elections, and love our countries. We grieve when innocent people die, regardless of their religion or nationality. And when a war breaks out halfway across the world, we feel the pain like everyone else. But instead of sympathy, we're met with suspicion. It's easy to hate what you don't understand. And right now, the West is suffering from a serious lack of understanding. Too many people get their entire perception of Islam from a handful of headlines and a few viral clips. They don't know the community pox, the late night prayers, the charity drives, the deep spiritual peace that Islam brings to millions. And they never will unless someone shows them. So what do we do in the face of rising hate? We speak up, we show, we tell our stories, we hold on to dignity and compassion, even when we met with ignorance. Because hate can't survive exposure. It thrives in silence, in distance, in othering. But when people hear your voice, see your life, and recognize your humanity, something begins to shift. I won't pretend it's easy. It hurts to be misjudged, to feel targeted. But I believe in the power of truth. I believe most people, if given the chance, will choose understanding over fear. And maybe, just maybe, when the next conflict breaks out, we won't let hate win again. If there's one thing the West continues to get wrong about Islam, it's this: they think we're all the same. One religion mindset, one culture, one threat. That ignorance, the refusal to see the complexity within Islam, isn't just lazy thinking, it's dangerous. And after the Iran-Israel war, it's become painfully clear just how deep that misunderstanding runs. I've lost count of how many times people have spoken to me as if I represent all Muslims, as if I have some direct line to global events or share identical beliefs with everyone who identifies as Muslim. It's almost surreal. Imagine assuming that every Christian believes the exact same thing, regardless of whether they're Catholic in Rome or Baptist in Texas. It's ridiculous, right? But when it comes to Islam, that's the norm. After the war, tensions were high. People were angry. And instead of separating governments from ordinary people or differentiating between sects, ethnic groups, or regional cultures, the narrative quickly collapsed into one word: Muslim. That was the identity they blamed. That was the label they feared. Not Iranian, not Shia, not government-backed militias, just Muslim. But Islam isn't one thing. It never has been. It's a faith of nearly 2 billion people stretched across every continent, every culture, every race. It includes Arabs and Africans, South Asians and Europeans, Indonesians and Americans. There are Sunni and Shia Muslims, Sufis and Salafis, progressives and conservatives. People who pray 5 times a day and people who don't pray at all. People who wear traditional clothing and people who wear jeans and hoodies. People who quote Rumi and people who quote Malcolm X. And yet the West continues to flatten all of that diversity into a single, fearful stereotype. I remember someone asking me, "Why does your religion support terrorism?" And I just stood there, stunned. Not because of the question, but because of the assumption behind it. As if all Muslims, regardless of where we're from or how we practice, are somehow aligned with the most extreme versions of our faith. As if the actions of a militant group define the beliefs of a peaceful family in Michigan or a shopkeeper in Birmingham. This ignorance isn't just frustrating, it leads to real-world consequences. Policies get passed that target Muslims as if we're a unified threat. Surveillance programs don't distinguish between someone protesting for human rights in Iran and someone peacefully attending mosque in Canada. Airports flag names, not ideologies. The world reacts to Muslim countries as if they're interchangeable, ignoring the deep political, theological, and cultural differences between, say, Turkey and Pakistan or Morocco and Iran. And the media plays a huge role in this. When they cover Islam, they rarely show its diversity. They don't highlight the Indonesian woman leading environmental reform or the black British imam building bridges in his community. They don't talk about the millions of Muslims who condemn violence, who work in healthcare, who teach, who serve in the military, who vote, who volunteer. Those stories aren't sensational enough, they won't get clicks. So instead, we get looped footage of angry protesters in the streets or shadowy images of armed men in desert landscapes. And that becomes the entire image of Islam. But here's what's ironic: the very diversity the West ignores is actually the strongest argument against the fear they push. If Islam really were the singular, violent ideology they claim, why would it look so different across the globe? Why would millions of Muslims live peacefully in Western democracies? Why would Muslim-majority countries have such varied political systems, cultures, and levels of religious expression? The diversity disproves the stereotype, but only if you're willing to see it. Too often people see a hijab and assume extremism. They hear Arabic and assume danger. They meet a practicing Muslim and brace for confrontation. But the truth is, the vast majority of us are just trying to live, to worship, to raise families, to work hard, to do good, just like anyone else. And we don't all agree, not even close. We debate theology, politics, and practice just like every other global community. We argue, we adapt, we grow, but none of that nuance fits into the scary Muslim narrative, so it gets erased. The problem is, when you erase someone's complexity, it becomes easier to dehumanize them, to fear them, to hate them. And that's exactly what's happened. After the war, I saw so many people lumping all Muslims into one category: dangerous, untrustworthy, alien. And once that label sticks, it's incredibly hard to shake off. But we're not a monolith. We never have been. And the sooner people realize that, the sooner we can have real conversations ones based on understanding, not suspicion. I've met Muslims who are deeply conservative and others who are radically progressive. Some who pray in Arabic, others who don't speak a word of it. Some who fast every Ramadan without fail, and others who struggle, who question, who wrestle with their faith. That's what a living religion looks like. It's not robotic, it's human. So when the world watches a conflict like the Iran-Israel war and then turns around to blame Muslims as a whole, they're not just being unfair. They're being intellectually dishonest. They're choosing simplicity over truth, fear over understanding. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for accuracy. For people to see Islam the way it really is, vast, varied, and deeply human. Because only then can we begin to move past fear. Only then can we stop scapegoating and start building something better. Something based not on ignorance, but on respect. Every time a crisis breaks out, especially one involving a Muslim majority country, you can almost predict what comes next. Before the dust even settles, before people have even understood what actually happened, certain political leaders jump into action. Not to heal, not to unify, but to capitalize. They don't waste time offering understanding or nuance. Instead, they light the fire of fear and then stand in front of it, acting like they're the only ones who can save you. I've watched this play out again and again. After the Iran-Israel war, it was no different. Within hours, press conferences were held, statements were made, and security concerns suddenly dominated national conversations. The message wasn't subtle. It never is. We have to protect ourselves. We must remain vigilant. But what they were really saying was, you fear Muslims, trust us. They frame it as leadership, as strength, but it's manipulation. Because behind all those speeches about national security is a darker truth. Fear wins elections. Fear gets headlines. Fear distracts. When people are scared, they stop asking questions. They don't challenge laws. They don't debate policies. They just want to feel safe. And politicians know this. So they give the public someone to fear. And Islam, over and over again, becomes the easy target. Not because of facts, but because it's unfamiliar to many in the West. It's misunderstood, exotic, foreign. So it becomes the perfect scapegoat. After every attack, every war, every incident abroad, leaders feed the narrative that Muslims, all Muslims, might be a threat. And if they can convince you of that, they can justify almost anything. Stricter immigration laws. Blame it on keeping the country safe from radicals. Surveillance programs that disproportionately target Muslim communities. Blame it on fighting extremism. Bans on religious clothing or closures of certain schools or charities. Just precautionary measures. They'll say, it's all packaged neatly as patriotism, but underneath it's fear-mongering. I've lived through these shifts. I've seen how quickly the atmosphere changes when politicians choose to exploit fear. Suddenly, policies that would have been considered outrageous a few years ago are passed with little resistance. People are so desperate for protection. They stop noticing who's being targeted, or worse, they start to believe it's justified. And let's be honest, these politicians don't care about Islam or Muslims. Most of them haven't read the Quran. They don't know a single Muslim personally, but they know how to use an enemy. They know how to rally people around a cause, and if that cause is defending the nation from Islam, they'll ride it all the way to the polls. What's worse is how often this tactic works, because when you repeat a lie often enough, especially when it comes from people in power, it starts to sound like truth. People begin to believe that Muslim immigration is dangerous, that Islam is incompatible with Western values, that Moscow is a breeding grounds for extremism. And once those seeds are planted, they grow into real policies, real discrimination, real violence. And in the middle of all that, real people suffer. Ordinary Muslims who've done nothing wrong find themselves questioned, followed, profiled. Kids at school are bullied. Women in hijabs are harassed. Communities are told they don't belong, all because someone in office decided fear was more profitable than truth. The irony is, these same leaders often talk about freedom and democracy. They stand at podiums, waving flags, claiming to defend Western values. But where is that freedom when an entire group of people is constantly being treated with suspicion? Where is the democracy when policies are passed without fair debate, simply because fear shut down the conversation? I've come to realize something: fear is a shortcut. It's what leaders use when they don't want to do the hard work of real leadership. It's easy to divide, easy to point fingers. What's hard is educating people, building trust, showing compassion without sacrificing security. But that kind of leadership doesn't make headlines. Fear does. I've seen politicians introduce policies targeting Muslims right before elections, timed perfectly to stir up controversy and get airtime. I've seen them make statements designed to provoke, then act shocked when people react. It's all performance, a show. And sadly, many voters don't realize they're being played. But we have to start recognizing the pattern. We have to ask ourselves who benefits from this fear. Who gains power when we're divided? Because it's not the everyday person on the street. It's not the families just trying to live in peace. It's the politicians who know that fear keeps them in control. And until we stop rewarding that strategy with our silence or our votes, it's going to keep happening. The next conflict, the next attack, the next controversy, it will all be followed by the same wave of political posturing and public suspicion. And Muslims will once again be put on trial in the court of public opinion. So I say this as someone who's lived under that shadow. Don't let fear make you blind. Don't fall for the same script every time. There are Muslims who are conservative, liberal, apolitical, religious, secular. Just like any other group, there are good and bad people in every community. But to paint an entire religion with the same brush again and again because it's politically convenient, that's not leadership, that's cowardice. Real leaders calm fear. They don't spread it. They bring people together. They don't tear them apart for votes. So the next time you hear a politician speaking about protecting the nation after a war or crisis, listen closely. Ask what they're really trying to protect and what they're trying to distract you from.